So we're in this series being stuck and seeking to get unstuck. You know, sometimes there are times when you discover that you're stuck and you find yourself wondering, what in the world was I thinking? What did I really kind of get myself into? You know, sometimes it's just a struggle. What was I thinking before I did this? But we get stuck. Sometimes we can find ourselves getting stuck and all we wanted to do was have a little fun. We just wanted to have fun. But we got ourselves stuck. And there are other times that we get stuck when we try and hide what's really going on in our lives, and we need someone's help to get us out. If you haven't noticed, that's a cow's head stuck in a tree. You know, we use pictures of cows like this, but the truth is, these same things are true for us. These same things cause us to get stuck as well. Being stuck can feel like we're in quicksand, or a tar pit, if you will. When we realize we're stuck, what do? We instantly try and fight. We try to get ourselves out, but before long, we realize that the fighting just makes the matters worse. That it just puts us deeper into being stuck. So we've been looking at this place of how can we become people that can get ourselves unstuck. We've looked at step one. Toby, you can take it from here if you'd like. We look at step one. It says that we admitted that we're powerless over our mess and our lives are unmanageable. That we've admitted that we're powerless. That we need something bigger than ourselves. And so we went to step two, and we came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. So even part of that first step is realizing that there's something not right. That we need help getting out of the craziness that we find our lives in. And then we moved into step three last week, and it says that we made a decision to turn our lives and our wills over to the care of God. The first action step, if you will. To turn our lives over to God and to ask Him to take control. Now we come today to step number 4. The first 3 steps are really important, but they're somewhat theoretical. So when we look at step 4, we see that this is actually a concrete step that we have to physically do. So step 4 says that we resolve to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So this is a tough one. And let's just be real honest with each other right up front. There are many of you in this room who won't do this step. You've already made up your mind. You won't do it. Some will say that I don't need to do this. I don't struggle with any issues. But there's that ego again that said that, there's nothing wrong. Some of you are not even sure why the pastor is talking about the 12 steps, drugs and alcohol and addictions anyway. You think these messages are irrelevant to you, and quite frankly, you could care less about doing any moral inventory. For anyone who has those thoughts or feeling, I challenge you to go home. And when you go home, I want you to look in the mirror, because in front of you, looking back, you will find the clinical definition of denial. Because the step will never happen as long as you tell yourself you're all good. Because the reality is, not one of us has a clean slate. We all struggle with things. We all have things that hinder our relationship with other people. We all have areas in our life that we can grow in, that we could do better in. But the first step is admitting, I have work to do. I remember the first time I went to do this moral inventory. The scripture that really kept going through my mind as I was doing this, because I too was like some of you who said, why in the world am I doing this? I can think it up in my head. Why do I need to write it down on paper? But then I thought of this scripture in James chapter 1, starting verse 22. It says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror. After looking at himself, goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. So do not merely just look at what God's word says to us, but putting it into practice, actually doing it. We stop pretending that our lives are manageable and under our own power, that we can do these things, and we actually look at the defects in our life. We leave behind those theoretical discussions that everyone has issues. Everybody's got issues. Because we use that phrase to get out of addressing our own. Because if everyone has issues, why do I need to address mine? I'm good. I don't need to. But when we begin to realize that those Herculean efforts that we've tried to keep ourselves unaware of those issues, they don't go away. They're right there to quickly remind us. And if they're not in your head mentally, they're in your body physically. I think I've shared before about my psychological evaluation that I had to go under to be a United Methodist pastor. I filled out these questions. I answered this, like multiple tests. And I go and I sit in front of a lady who has the printouts of all of my reports of these evaluations. And she looks at this flow chart and says, so tell me about your chronic headaches and stomach aches. I'm like, show me on that chart where you found that. It's like, how does a little flow chart tell you that I have chronic headaches and stomach aches? She's like, you don't communicate your stress, do you? You bottle it up and keep it in? I'm like, yeah, I'm a man. Hello? And she said, well, what you need to realize is when you don't process what you feel and the stresses that you have, when you don't share and talk through those things, your headaches and your stomach aches, that's your body's way of processing your stress. So if you keep it in, it's going to come out one way or another. You have to deal with the stress, with the issues, with the problems in your life in order to be healthy. It's fascinating, though, when we look at Jesus. Jesus loved to help people with fearless moral inventories. You see, he realized when people were stuck and they needed to take a deeper look at their life. And so he really enjoyed, I think, sometimes looking at people's lives and helping them get started on their fearless moral inventory. If you ever have any questions about this, just simply turn to Matthew chapter 23 and read where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees. He calls them a whole lot of names, one of them being hypocrites. Pretty much his synopsis looks a little bit like this. You are actually some of the most hypocritical people I've ever met. Outside what you portray to other people looks great, but I know your inside, and just under the surface of your teeming with greed and selfish indulgence, there is hypocrisy and wickedness inside of you. He sees what's inside of them, and because they are not willing to take paper and or pen and put it to paper and evaluate themselves because, I mean, they were the religious elite. They knew everything that they needed to know. And not only did they know it, they memorized it. And they could tell you where it said a certain law within the first 5 books of the Bible called the Torah. They had it memorized. They knew it all by heart. I mean, they were the religious elite. Why on earth would they ever have to look within themselves and see something going on? So let's unpack this step number 4 a little bit. It says that we resolve to make a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm pretty good at doing moral inventories on other people. Some might say I have a gift. And I'm probably sure that some of you in here probably have the same gift that I do. Probably all of us, actually. I mean, we're really good at pointing out what other defects people have in their life. But here's the thing that we first need to get around this step number 4 is that it says that we took an inventory of ourselves. See, what we need to do is we need to realize that what we think about everyone else does not matter. It has 0 value. The only thing that matters is what we do with ourselves. It's what we do with ourselves. Jesus had something to say about that. In Matthew 7, verses 3 and 5, he says, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye." It's pretty crazy if you think about how much time we spend critiquing and criticizing and doing these moral inventories of the people around us. But yet we spend very little time in doing the only thing that would have lasting value. And that's to look at ourselves. Another part of this phrase says that we will take a searching moral inventory. You see that word is there for a reason. It's not meant to be a quick thing. It's meant to be a deep dive into your life. This isn't something that you're going to be able to do in a couple hours. It may take a couple days. It may take a couple weeks. And I'm not talking about sitting down and doing it from beginning to end. Like, I wouldn't ever do it if it was that, right? So, it takes some time and break it up, but it should take time for you to do this. To look deep within yourself. So many times when we look at an issue and we think that, oh, we're good, we've dealt with it. But yet that issue comes back up. It's almost like God is telling us, no, we're not just going to bury it this time. We're going to go deeper this time. We need to really look at what is causing the issue or the problem that we have. What's really going on within us? David in Psalm 139, he says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting." You see, the way of everlasting is at the end of the road of looking deeply within ourselves. We can't get to the end without starting at the beginning and looking at ourselves. The last descriptor in this phrase or this step says that we will take a fearless and searching moral inventory. It says fearless because we have to remember what we said in step 3. That we turn our will and our lives over to God and to His care. When we turn our will and our lives over to God, we're saying, "You're in control. We're saying we're going to stand not on our weaknesses or our faults, but we're going to stand on your strength, God. That we're going to look at ourselves not through the lens of our own eyes or not through the lens of the people around us, but we're going to look through the lens of God. Because I'll be honest with you. The first time I sat down and did a moral inventory, it hurt. Because you see, when I was honest with myself and I started writing, and I started putting the things that my hang-ups, the things that I struggle with, the things that the pain that I've caused in other people's lives, the list kept growing. And the bigger that list got, my first reaction was to want to stop. Was to almost just want to throw up my hands and say, what's the point? But then I realized I can be a better person. I could be a better husband, a better father, a better pastor by doing these things. And that's what I wanted to do. And just putting it out there, I'm the person I am today because I've taken the time to sit down and look at me. And you say, you know what? It's not everyone else's problem. It's not everyone else's fault around me that I'm this way. It's my choice. And I had to look at my life. One of the things that was hard for me, but you know what? I had to put it aside and say, you know what? It may have been hard for me, but I did a lot more damage to the people around me. The simple fact that I have a son, that I was never married to his mom. You know, I can blame it on a whole bunch of things. You know, I was young, I was, immature, I didn't know any better. But those are just excuses. The reality is I knew exactly what I was doing. But you know what I wasn't thinking about? That person that God had in store for my life to be my wife. I was not thinking about that person. I was thinking about me. And Jennifer has spent the last 12 years dealing with my mess. It's our anniversary today, by the way. And so literally like 12 years to be exact. In the first lot of years, that was the hardest thing in our marriage. She struggles with it. And my first thing was to get defensive and defend myself. And I don't understand why you're doing this or why you feel this way. But you know what? I had to realize that she felt that way because of what I did. It wasn't about her reactions. It was always about me and what I did. And I was never going to be able to be the husband that she needed me to be as long as I was only focusing on me and not her. But that simple thing came out of sitting down and being honest with myself and saying, this is a struggle. This is a barrier between a healthier relationship. From the very beginning of our marriage, Jennifer said two things. She said, you know what? We can have an okay marriage or we can have a great marriage. And I'm not okay with an okay marriage. That's one of the best things she could say to me. I'm not going to settle for less than what I expect out of a relationship. You see, prior to Jennifer, I didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like. And so everything that was healthy, I got defensive against. Until I stood back and I looked at me. and why I felt those things. I had to look at my family history. I had to look at how I was raised. I had to ask hard questions that I still don't like today. But it made me a stronger person. But when we stand on God and we look at ourselves and we say, you know what, God, I'm not worthy of you dying on a cross for me after I, look at how sinful I am. But then we look at what God says, and he says in Ephesians 2 that you are God's workmanship. That you are not a mistake. God's computer system did not have a glitch when he made you. He made you exactly how he wanted you to be. And we can stand on that promise that God is our foundation. We can be tempted when we're doing this moral inventory to look at the things and not want to do it. I know them in my head. I don't need to write them down. But you see, what I've realized is that we're afraid. We're afraid. One of the things that the moral inventory actually looks at is fears. What are the things that we're afraid to look at? Because you see, when we put it down on a piece of paper, we have to own it. And we don't want to. Because that would have to admit that we're not as good as we thought we were. That we have to actually own the things in our life. But here's the thing. Do not fear writing down on a piece of paper what God already knows. What I'm not saying is that you write out this long list of all the sins that you've made and go share it with somebody. That's not what I'm saying. This is between you, the piece of paper, and God. And he already knows what you're going to put on the paper. But the thing is, you don't. So that's why you need to do it. Because I promise you, if you start and you get going, you'll start beginning to ask yourself, when am I going to stop? Because one issue kind of leads into another issue and you begin with, and it's overwhelming. But that's okay. It's okay. So in the moral inventory, the first section talks about resentments or grudges. I really like the use of the word grudges or resentments here, because if someone asks me who I'm angry with, I'm going to probably give them the Christian answer. Oh, I'm not angry with them. I'm just frustrated. Or, I'm not angry. They just made me upset. No, you're angry with them. But you just don't want to use that word. So what resentments or what people are you angry with? Asking yourselves the question, toward whom am I angry? Why am I angry? How does the anger show up in my life? And where am I to blame? I talked about the fears just a few minutes ago. So looking at fears, what am I afraid of? Why am I afraid of it? Where does fear show up in my life? What do I do to numb the fear in my life? Some of you will be afraid of doing a simple thing as a moral inventory because you know what you'll discover and you don't want to deal with it. But the one thing I want you to remember when it comes to your fear is until you surrender control of whatever it is in your past to God, whatever that thing is will continue to control you. You will only get past the things that are controlling you when you surrender control of them to God. You have to be willing to let go of it. Why is it we hold on to our own baggage? We hold on to it because we don't want to deal with it. But Jesus simply says to us to cast our cares upon him, to put our yoke on his shoulders. Because he doesn't want us to carry it alone. He's not saying, put it all on my shoulders, don't deal with it. He's saying, let me carry the load so that you are able to deal with it. Surrendering our fears. The next one is harm. Where are the places in your life where you have harmed people? I gave you an example of that earlier. Who have I harmed? What did I do or fail to do? What motivated my action? What should I have done instead? And then the last one. Some of you are getting ready to put on your brake and probably pull the emergency brake at the same time. The next one, the last one, is sexual conduct. This one can get pretty difficult. Some of you are probably saying, not an issue for me. Okay, just because my head may look like I was born yesterday, I wasn't. I've seen and I've heard about some of the romance novels y'all read. That's a sexual conduct issue. And I'm sure there's plenty of people, I hope not plenty, but I'm sure there's some people in this room that have seen or read the book 50 Shades of Grey. That's a sexual conduct issue. I hope not, but it is. It's something that you have to look at. And believe it or not, in thought and deed, our sexual conduct represents the most intimate place of our lives. There are things that we need to deal with because whether it's in relationships, whether it's a pornography addiction, those things come out in our relationships. Those things are communicated to the people around us, whether we want to believe it or not. So the 4 questions there. Who did I engage in inappropriately sexual conduct with? What did we do? What was the exact nature of my wrong? What should I have done instead? Those are hard questions. Guess where I grew the most after I did this for the first time? The very section I never thought I would have anything to deal with, right? Simply because I didn't want to deal with it. But that's where I grew. Because I wasn't willing to say, nope, it's not my problem. I wasn't willing to say, put myself in denial. I was willing to say, you know what? I'm a human. I'm a sexual being. I messed up. I've got to own it. I've got to do better. To close with you, I wanted to share part of a journal entry. After I sat down and did this for the first time, so February 21st, 2012, this is what I had written in a journal. It says, as I processed through this moral inventory, I did not have any problem writing down my transgressions on paper. However, I did have some I did not want to write. The more I wrote, the more I could feel the shame coming over me. At first, it really did not even dawn on me that I was so freely writing the transgressions of my life without even blinking. Parts of me thinks I can do this because I have confessed these things to God, and I know that I have been forgiven. Why I could write them so easily. However, one of the things I struggle with is that as I write this, my 2 little girls are playing in the background. And I cannot help but realize how disappointed this moral inventory would make them feel. I know as a parent, I would never want to hear my kids confessing such sins. For me, working through this moral inventory has helped me see that I want to be a better example for my kids. I think the biggest struggle for me was to find the time to put into this moral inventory so that I could give it the attention it required to do it justice. Through this process, I have come to realize that I have an attachment to stress. I always have to be doing something. And it is very difficult for me to take time to slow down and rest. This affects my family the most because I struggle to slow down and spend quality time with my wife and kids. I am always thinking about the next thing that needs to be done or things that I could be working on. I have come to realize that this process is a lot harder than merely writing down some things I have done in my life, but something I need to do more often. Every year I sit down and I try to do this. And you know, one of the things I found is it gets a little easier. It gets a little easier to face the things that I've done. It gets a little easier to grow from the things that I've seen, the things that I've struggled with. If you were to ask me, and I will answer it as though you did, if you were to ask me, why am I putting time into looking at the 12 steps? And looking at faith and how they intertwine. Because in February 2012, I grew the most as a man that I have ever before. Because I was willing to humble myself a little bit and admit that I've got some problems. That I've got some things that I need to work through. And that became a moment in my life where I realized that I was really powerless. Because I had put these things so far behind me that I didn't even realize they were still there. But you know what? I wasn't a very good son. I wasn't, like one of my pastor friends says, I'm an awesome pastor, but I suck as a Christian, to put it bluntly. Because we can get in that rut as pastors that we're really good at preaching on Sunday, but we don't take the time to look at our own lives. We don't take the time to grow in our own faith because we're just trying to pour into everyone else, and we give and give and give, but we never stop and receive from God. What I got out of these 12 steps was a knowledge to sit and receive from God. Because I am who I am today because I took the time to simply write down my shortcomings, my sins, and own them. And guess what? I have not arrived. I've still got stuff to work on. That's why it'll actually come up in step 10 where you repeat it. It becomes a regular part of your life that this is something you shouldn't just do once and, hey, I'm good. No, you should do it often. I would suggest at least minimum of once a year to get honest with yourself. And I made this statement at the beginning, let's be honest, that some of you won't even do this. You've already stopped. But that is not my hope. My hope is that every single one of us would begin to make this a practice in our life. That we would begin to stop and look at ourselves. Are we the person, when we look in the mirror, are we the follower of Christ He wants us to be? If not, What do you need to do? What do you need to do? But you have to first admit that you're powerless over the mess that you're in, and that your life has become unmanageable. You have to be willing to submit your life to God and your will. That your will would become in tune with His will for your life. That you'd be willing to sit down and take a fearless and searching moral inventory. That's my prayer for us. I'm passionate about it because I've seen what it's done in me. And I see what it can continue to do in me. You see, if I am not the follower of Christ that I need to be, then me as a pastor is an oxymoron. Because I cannot help you if I can't help myself. I cannot be the father that God wants me to be if I don't take care of me in my relationship with God. I cannot be the husband that I need to be, that God expects me to be, if I don't look at myself in my relationship with Him. I can't be a friend. I can't be anything in my life that God has created me to be if I don't take the time and be honest with myself to make me the best person that I can be. Jesus said in John 10:10 that I have come that you may have life and have it to the full. Well, the fullness comes out of looking at ourselves in relation to Him. Where do we need to work? Where do we need to get honest with ourselves? My prayer is that we will begin by surrendering and letting God be in control, and that we would stop trying to be God ourselves.